A year ago, a blind girl living in the city of San Francisco found herself confronted with a transportation problem. A rerouting of buses forced her to make 3 transfers between her home and her office. This lengthened her trip from 15 minutes to 2 hours and 15 minutes. She thought seriously about this problem and came to the decision that a car was the solution. She knew that she could not drive a car, but felt that she could be driven in one. Putting this theory to the test that whenever the actions of the inner self correspond to the actions which the outer physical self must take to appease desire, that desire will be realized, she said to herself. I will sit here and imagine that I am being driven to my office. Sitting in her living room, she began to imagine herself seated in a car. She felt the rhythm of the motor. She imagined that she smelled the odor of gasoline, felt the motion of the car, touched the sleeve of the driver, and felt that the driver was a man. She felt the car stop and, turning to her companion, said, "Thank you very much, sir." To which he replied, "The pleasure is all mine." Then she stepped from the car and heard the door snap shut as she closed it. She told me that she centered her imagination on being in a car and, although blind, viewed the city from her imaginary ride. She did not think of the ride. She thought from the ride and all that it implied. This controlled and subjectively directed purpose of ride raised her imagination to its full potency. She kept her purpose ever before her, knowing there was cohesion and purposive inner movement. In these mental journeys, an emotional continuity must be sustained. The emotion of fulfilled desire, expectancy, and desire were so intensely joined that they passed at once from a mental state into a physical act. The inner self moves along the predetermined course, best when the emotions collaborate. The inner self must be fired, and it is best fired by the thought of great deeds and personal gain. We must take pleasure in our actions. On 2 successive days, the blind girl took her imaginary ride, giving it all the joy and sensory vividness of reality. A few hours after her second imaginary ride, a friend told her of a story in the evening paper. It was a story of a man who was interested in the blind. The blind girl phoned him and stated her problem. The very next day, on his way home, he stopped in at a bar, and Wilder had the urge to tell the story of the blind girl to his friend, the proprietor. A total stranger, on hearing the story, volunteered to drive the blind girl home every day. The man who told the story then said, "If you will take her home, I will take her to work." This was over a year ago, and since that day, this blind girl has been driven to and from her office by these 2 gentlemen. Now, instead of spending 2 hours and 15 minutes on 3 buses, she's at her office in less than 15 minutes. And on that first ride to her office, she turned to her Good Samaritan and said, "Thank you very much, sir." And he replied, "The pleasure is all mine." Thus, the objects of her imagination were to her the realities of which the physical manifestation was only the witness. The determinative animating principle was the imaginative ride. Her triumph could be a surprise only to those who did not know of her inner ride. She mentally viewed the world from this imaginative ride with such a clearness of vision that every aspect of the city attained identity. These inner movements not only produce corresponding outer movements. This is the law which operates beneath all physical appearances. He who practices these exercises of bilocation will develop unusual powers of concentration and quiescence, and will inevitably achieve waking consciousness on the inner and dimensionally larger world. Actualizing strongly, she fulfilled her desire, for, viewing the city from the feeling of her wish fulfilled, she matched the state desired and granted that to herself, which sleeping men ask of God. To realize your desire, an action must start in your imagination. Apart from the evidence of the senses involving movement of self and implying fulfillment of your desire, whenever it is the action which the outer self takes to appease desire, that desire will be realized. The movement of every visible object is caused not by things outside the body, but by things within it, which operate from within outward.